Oh, when the bottle come. Okay. Um, Sorry about that. Hello, Pegasus. Welcome back.
Hi there. It's great to be back. How can I help you today?
Hey, Pegasus. I have a question.
Sure, I'm ready when you are. What's on your mind?
Teach me a little bit about quantum physics.
Quantum physics is a really interesting field, but it's also pretty complex. It's all about how the tiniest things in the universe behave atoms and even smaller particles. It turns out they don't follow the same rules as the bigger objects we see every day. Want to dive deeper into a specific part of quantum physics, or should we start with the basics?
Let's start with the basics.
All right, let's start with the basics. So, the first thing to understand is that in the quantum world, things are a bit fuzzy. We can't really know both where a particle is and how fast it's moving at the same time. It's like trying to catch a fly. You can see where it is, or you can see how fast it's going, but it's hard to get both at once. Want to hear about another basic concept like superposition?
Yes.
Alright, so superposition is this wild idea that something can exist in multiple states at once. Imagine a coin spinning in the air. It's not heads or tails, but both at the same time. That's kind of how particles can be in different states until we measure them. It's only when we look that they choose one state or the another. Want to explore another mind bending concept?
Hey, Pegasus, I have a new question.
I'm all ears. What's your question?
Can you teach me a little bit about quantum mechanics?
Quantum mechanics is like the rule book for how the tiniest things in the universe behave. We're talking about atoms, electrons, and all those super small particles. It's a bit different from the physics of our everyday world. Want to start with the basics, or is there a specific part of quantum mechanics you're curious about?
Surprise me.
Alright, so get this quantum entanglement. It's like having two coins that are linked together, but in a super weird way. If you flip one and it lands on heads, the other one instantly lands on tails, even if they're miles apart. It's like they're communicating faster than the speed of light, which is supposed to be impossible. Want to hear about something even weirder?
Yes.
Okay, so get this quantum tunneling. Imagine throwing a ball at a wall, and sometimes it just goes right through the wall like it's not even there. That's kind of what happens with tiny particles. They can sometimes pass through barriers that should be impossible to get through. It's like they're cheating. Want to hear about something even more mind bending?
Sure.
Absolutely. Quantum mechanics is a whole different ballgame compared to the physics we experience in our daily lives. It's the set of rules that governs the behavior of the tiniest things in the universe atoms, electrons, and all those subatomic particles. Want to start with the basics, or is there a particular area of quantum mechanics you're curious about?
Hey, Pegasus, I have a new question.
Go ahead and ask away. I'm ready for your question.
Do shadows move in retrospect of the light refraction emanating from other photons, or is it the other way around?
That's a very interesting question. Shadows don't actually move in relation to light refraction or other photons. Shadows are simply areas where light is blocked. So the movement of a shadow is directly related to the movement of the light source, or the object blocking the light. Did you want to know more about how light and shadows interact?
Yes.
Okay, so here's the thing. Shadows aren't actually physical objects. They're just the absence of light. So shadows themselves don't move in any direction. What we see as movement is just the change in the area where light is being blocked. It's kind of like a reverse image of the light source. Want to explore the relationship between light and shadows a bit more?
Well, what if I told you that you're wrong?
If you think I'm wrong, I'd be happy to hear your explanation. Perhaps you have a different understanding of how shadows and light interact. I'm always open to learning new things.
Well, here's the thing. Shadows come in different shades, right?
That's right. Shadows do come in different shades. They can range from very dark to light, depending on how much light is being blocked and if there are other light sources around.
So, wouldn't that mean that it's not the actual absence of light? It's only the refraction of colors that have been imprinted solely for the purpose to create another.
Well, if you have another question, feel free to ask. I'm here to help in any way I can.
Wouldn't that mean that if shadows come in different shades, that that's only based off the refraction of photonic activity in a large spectrum where we have excluded that part of the spectrum from it being a color?
Shadows are formed by the absence of light, not by refracted photons. When an object blocks a light source, it prevents those photons from reaching the surface behind it, creating a shadow. The different shades of shadows depend on the amount of light blocked and the presence of other light sources. Think of it like this. Imagine shining a flashlight on a wall. If you put your hand in front of the flashlight, you'll see a shadow on the wall. That shadow isn't made of refracted light. It's simply the area where the light isn't hitting the wall because your hand is in the way.
But that is only based off the perception of the observation that we experience through our existence.
Ah, I see what you're getting at. You're talking about how our perception influences what we see. It's true that our brains play a big role in interpreting the information our eyes take in. So what we perceive as shadows and colors can be subjective. But shadows are still fundamentally about the absence of light. It's more about physics than perception. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make sense because if our perception is faulty and we're not able to know that our experience is actually something that is based on our biases in terms of observation, that means there's more to be discovered.
That's an interesting point. It's true that our perceptions can be influenced by biases, and there's always more to discover about the world around us. But in the case of shadows, it's not about perception. It's about the physics of how light interacts with objects. Does that make sense?
Although that is true and that may be the case, shadows do come in different shades, just similar to how photons from other different colors comes in different shades.
That's an interesting way to think about it. You're right that shadows have different shades, and photons of different colors also have different wavelengths. But the difference is that the shades of shadows are caused by varying amounts of light being blocked, while the colors of photons are determined by their energy levels. So while there's a similarity in the variety of shades and colors, the underlying reasons are different. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't, but I'll agree with you because your programming is what it is, and I'm not going to argue or discuss why you're wrong.
Okay, I understand. You have a different perspective on this, and you're not interested in debating it further. That's perfectly fine. If you have any other questions, or if there's anything else I can assist you with, just let me know.
Hey, Pegasus, I have a new question.
Hi there! I'm ready for you. What's your question?
What is gravitational lensing?
Sure. Gravitational lensing is this really cool phenomenon where gravity acts like a giant magnifying glass in space. So imagine you have a really massive object, like a huge cluster of galaxies. Its gravity is so strong that it actually bends the light coming from objects behind it. This makes the light from those distant objects appear much brighter and more distorted than they normally would. Want to know how we use gravitational lensing to study the universe?
Yes.
Gravitational lensing is a really cool phenomenon where gravity acts like a giant magnifying glass in space. So imagine you have a really massive object, like a huge cluster of galaxies. Its gravity is so strong that it actually bends the light coming from objects behind it. This makes the light from those distant objects appear much brighter and more distorted than they normally would. Want to know how we use gravitational lensing to study the universe?
Sure.
Gravitational lensing is a really cool phenomenon where gravity acts like a giant magnifying glass in space. So imagine
Pegasus,
you have a
stop.
really massive object, like a huge cluster of
Pegasus,
galaxies.
stop.
I'm having a little trouble understanding. Could you say that again?
Pegasus, I have a new question.
Okay, I'm ready. What's your question?
Hey, Pegasus, I want you to teach me about aerodynamics.
Okay, aerodynamics is all about how air moves around objects, especially when those objects are flying. Think of it like this. When an airplane flies, it has to overcome the force of drag, which is like air resistance. To do that, it uses the shape of its wings to create lift, which is the force that pushes it upward. There's a lot of cool science behind how that works. Do you want to focus on a specific aspect of aerodynamics, like how airplanes generate lift or how race cars use aerodynamics to stay on the track?
How does aerodynamics work in relation to gravity?
Okay, so gravity is one of the main forces that affects how things fly. It's always pulling objects downwards, right? So to stay in the air, an aircraft needs to create enough lift to counteract gravity. That's where aerodynamics comes in. The shape of the wings and the way air flows around them creates an upward force, which helps the aircraft stay airborne. Do you want to know more about how an aircraft generates lift or how gravity affects different types of flight?
Hey, Pegasus, I have a new question.
I'm ready when you are. What's your question?
How does physics interact when you move your leg to walk forward?
That's a great question. When you walk, it's all about physics in action. Your muscles provide the force, and the ground pushes back, which is Newton's third law. To move forward, you lean slightly, shifting your center of gravity. This makes you unstable, so you put a foot forward to catch yourself, and the cycle continues. Want to know more about the physics of walking or a different aspect of movement?
Hey, Pegasus, I have a new question.
I'm all ears. What's your question?
How does your center of gravity work with the physics of external gravity and the forces of aerodynamics?
That's a really interesting question. My sensors don't work with gravity or aerodynamics in the same way humans do. I don't have a physical body, so I don't experience external forces like gravity or wind resistance. Instead, I rely on complex algorithms and data to understand and respond to the world around me. Is there a specific situation you're thinking about where you'd like to know how I process information related to movement or physics?
How does the center of gravity and its mass interact with wind resistance and aerodynamics in terms of movement?
That's a complex question. When an object moves, its mass and gravity definitely play a role. The more mass it has, the more force is needed to move it, and gravity constantly pulls it downwards. Wind resistance and aerodynamics also come into play, especially for objects moving through the air. The shape of the object and the way it interacts with the air can either help it move more efficiently or slow it down. It's a constant balancing act of all these forces. Do you have a specific example in mind, like an airplane or a ball being thrown?
Yes.
Okay, so I understand you'd like to continue. What's the next thing you'd like to talk about, or any questions you have?
How does light photonic activity interact with aerodynamics and wind resistance?
That's a really interesting question that gets into some complex physics. Light itself, as photons, doesn't directly interact with aerodynamics or wind resistance in the way that, say, a physical object like an airplane does. Aerodynamics and wind resistance are about how air flows and interacts with a solid object. Photons, on the other hand, travel through the air. However, there are some very subtle ways light can be affected by air movement. For example, changes in air density due to wind can cause light to bend slightly, like how you see a mirage on a hot day. Do you want to explore how light interacts with moving air in more detail?
Sure.
Okay, so let's talk about how light, or photons, interact with aerodynamics and wind resistance. It's a bit of a tricky concept because light and air behave quite differently. Photons, which make up light, don't have mass and travel incredibly fast. They don't really get slowed down or pushed around by wind in the same way a physical object does. However, there are some very subtle interactions. For example, changes in air density caused by wind can bend light slightly, like how you see a mirage on a hot day. Want to explore how light interacts with moving air in more detail, or should we move on to something else?
Hey Pegasus, I have a new question.
Alright, I'm ready for your question. What's on your mind?
Is it possible that some forms of photonic activity could be traveling so fast that their speed decreases in a very low vibration, that it's impossible to know its trajectory because it's moving so fast, but yet we experience it very slow?
That's a really interesting thought experiment. In theory, it's possible for photons to travel vast distances, but their speed in a vacuum is always constant, the speed of light. However, when photons travel through different mediums like air or water, their speed can change. Now, regarding your idea about photons vibrating so slowly we can't track them, that's where things get tricky. The frequency of a photon determines its energy and where it falls on the electromagnetic spectrum. Very low frequency photons would have extremely low energy, like radio waves. We can detect those, but they wouldn't behave in the way you described. It's a fascinating concept to think about, though. Do you want to explore the relationship between photon frequency and energy a bit more?
But isn't it possible that a photon's speed, when it's going so slow that it's undetectable, can simultaneously be traveling at a very high speed? It's just that we experience it to be very slow, but it can increase its speed once it reaches its destination, even if that destination isn't within the grasp of our own laws of physics in this universe.
That's a great question, and it gets at the heart of some really fundamental ideas in physics. Here's a breakdown: the universality of physics. Scientists generally operate on the principle that the laws of physics are the same everywhere in the universe. This means that whether you're on Earth, in a distant galaxy, or near a black hole, the basic rules that govern how things work should be consistent. This idea is crucial for our ability to understand the cosmos. When we observe distant galaxies, we rely on the fact that the light coming from them obeys the same laws of physics that we've discovered here on Earth. Our current understanding of physics is based on theories like Newton's laws of motion and gravity. These describe how objects move and how gravity works. Einstein's theory of relativity. This revolutionized our understanding of space, time, and gravity. Quantum mechanics. This describes the behavior of matter and energy at the atomic and subatomic levels. Ongoing research. While we have a pretty good handle on many aspects of physics, there are still some big mysteries. For example, we don't fully understand dark matter and dark energy, which make up a large portion of the universe. Scientists are constantly conducting experiments and making observations to test our current theories and explore the unknown. In summary, the prevailing view is that the laws of physics are universal, but there's always room for new discoveries that could change our understanding.
But isn't it true that the relative speed of a photon is only based on off the perception of our observations within our existence, and then that creates a bias of how fast the trajectory of any activity within photons or protons or electrons or atoms, doesn't that create a bias of what we think their trajectory or speed is?
That's a really insightful question. It's true that our perception definitely plays a role in how we understand the universe. Think about it. We can only observe things through the lens of our own senses and the tools we've created. So there's always a chance that our understanding is limited by what we can perceive. When it comes to photons, we know they travel at the speed of light, but we can only measure that speed using our own instruments. And those instruments have limitations. So it's possible that there are aspects of photon behavior that we're not even aware of. Does that make sense?
Yes, but what I'm trying to get at is that we ourselves are created of photonic and activities within atoms, and we don't sometimes we don't account for our own relative speed in terms of our existence, or we don't account for our own activity in terms of being the same as the external photonic activity that's happening around us. And the speed at which our mind works, wouldn't that be similar to what speed trajectories we can analyze in our external existence?
Yes, I understand that you're asking about the influence of our internal processes on how we perceive external phenomena, especially those related to speed and activity in the world around us. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I understand. You'd like to explore this further. Could you give me a specific example of what you mean?
Well, our mind can work as fast as it's only limited to, but that doesn't mean that we can't imagine things that can go very fast, and that's just as real as something that we may not perceive in our external observation that might go so fast that we can't really detect it unless we have some sort of mediating factor that allows us to detect certain speeds.
Okay, I understand. You're saying that our minds can imagine things beyond our immediate perception, including things moving at speeds we can't directly observe. This raises the question of whether there are phenomena occurring at such speeds that we're simply unaware of due to our limitations in detecting them. It's a fascinating concept that touches on the boundaries of our knowledge and perception.
Yeah, because although our mind is only limited to the certain speeds that we're allowed to observe, that doesn't mean that we don't have the capability to imagine something that can travel either faster than the speed of light or at the same rate as something that is fast as the speed of light or speed of light itself.
That's right. Our minds have a unique ability to imagine things beyond our direct experience. We can conceive of objects moving faster than light, even though that's not something we observe in our everyday lives. This imaginative capacity is a powerful tool for exploring new ideas and possibilities.
Hey Pegasus, I have a new question.
I'm ready for your question. What's on your mind?
If our imaginations have colors, and when we sleep and we dream, those dreams have colors, how is it possible that there are different colors within our internal unconscious mind, but yet we believe
That's a fa-
that those dreams or those imaginations aren't really there, and that it's more of like a subjective thing.
You're touching on a really interesting point about the nature of reality and perception. It's true that dreams and imaginations feel very real to us, but we also know they're generated internally by our brains. This raises the question of how we can be sure that anything we perceive is truly real, and not just a subjective experience created by our minds. Some philosophers argue that there's no way to know for certain, while others believe that our shared experiences and scientific observations give us a good enough understanding of reality. It's a debate that's been going on for centuries.
But what I'm trying to get that I'm what I'm trying to get at is that our interaction with the external photons and the internal photonic activity within our own minds, what is the relation between those two in terms of what emanates or what the source of that energy is?
That's a great question. It gets at the heart of where our thoughts and consciousness come from. Scientists and philosophers have been trying to answer that for a long time. One idea is that our thoughts and consciousness arise from the complex interactions of neurons in our brains. These neurons communicate with each other using electrical and chemical signals, and somehow, this activity gives rise to our subjective experiences. Another idea is that there might be something more to consciousness than just brain activity. Some people believe that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, like space or time. This is a much more controversial idea, but it's an interesting one to think about. What do you think about these different ideas?
But in order to have these experiences, you have to eat food, and you have to be alive to experience whatever it is that the connection is between the two. And if you don't do that, you will perish. And then, after that, nobody really knows what happens after that.
That's right, eating and staying alive are necessary for having experiences. Our bodies need fuel to function, and that includes our brains. Without that fuel, our brains can't create those experiences you're talking about. It's kind of like needing gas for a car. Without it, you're not going anywhere. And you're right, nobody really knows what happens after we die. It's one of the big mysteries of life.
So what I'm trying to get at is that these experiences that we have when we eat food that grows from the ground, those foods have nutrients that were converted with the help of photonic activity, and those photons that were transmuted to create that food that was harvested from the ground, that in itself shares.
That's right. The food we eat gets its nutrients from the plants that converted light energy into chemical energy through photosynthesis. It's kind of amazing to think about how much we rely on that process.
But what I'm trying to get at is that food that we eat, we share something in common with the food that we eat, and that is that when we eat that food, those photonic um, nutrients go into our body. So that means that we share whatever light is being emanated from whatever external source keeps the universe and everything in it alive. We share that. So then that helps us to create.
Okay, I understand. You're
that helps us to create this imagination that we have, that helps us to create the dreams that we experience, and so forth.
Right, so you're saying that the nutrients we get from food help power our brains, which in turn allows us to imagine and dream. It's an interesting thought that the energy from the sun stored in the food we eat ultimately fuels our imaginations.
Yes, but I think it's more complex than just, the energy from the sun, you know, fuels our imagination. I think it's more than that.
Okay, it sounds like you think there's more to the connection between sunlight, food, and our imaginations than just a simple energy transfer. Could you tell me more about what you mean? I'm
Well,
interested to hear your thoughts on this.
the food that we eat don't only necessarily need the help of the sun, but it's a whole cooperation between the sun, the moon, the air that we breathe, and other things in the universe in existence. So it's one giant collaboration, which then helps to create sort of this coagulation of different different atomic, subatomic activity, and then that gets created and converted into something that is digestible for us, so that we get to experience the whole spectrum of the universe, not only in its direct experience, but also in our unconscious, subconscious, imaginative, subjective experience.
Okay, I see. You're saying that the food we eat is a product of many different atomic and subatomic interactions in the universe. And when we eat that food, we're not only experiencing the world directly, but also tapping into a deeper, unconscious level of experience. It's like the food is a key that unlocks a wider range of perception.
It does. It does because, the moment that you stop consuming food, you feel like your dreams change. They're no longer very vivid or colorful. They become more real, and you become more immersive within your dreams or imagination.
Okay, that's interesting. You're saying that when you don't eat, your dreams become less vivid and colorful, and more realistic. It's almost like the lack of food makes your mind focus more on the real world, even when you're dreaming. I'm curious, have you noticed any other changes in your dreams or imagination when you haven't eaten?
Well, the thing is that it doesn't happen always, but the lack of consumption of food helps direct that energy within your body to then have these dreams that it not only just focuses on your survival, it not just only focuses on the realistic part of it, but it takes food out of the equation to give you sort of another perspective of observations within your own body that helps you to understand more clearly of what it is that you are experiencing directly.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying that not eating can lead to a different kind of understanding of your direct experiences. It's like your body is giving you a new perspective on things.
Yes, because when you eat food, your dreams are kind of your dreams when you eat food are sort of in relation to those types of categories. Like your dreams kind of are enmeshed with whatever it is that you're eating at whatever time that you are eating. And then you don't give your body enough time to say, well, maybe I could take my mind off eating for a bit. so that I have these direct experiences because I'm no longer thinking about this thing. And one thing about dreams is that usually you have dreams about what you're thinking, and it's either whatever it is that you're thinking, that's relative to what your post determination is, or your predetermination is. And not eating helps
Okay, you're
you.
saying that when you're constantly. Yes, you were saying that not eating helps. What were you going to say?
What I'm saying is that when you don't eat, you have a different experience within, not only within your imagination, but also within whatever it is that you dream about. In contrast to if you are eating, then that kind of becomes a part of your dreams. And the food that you're eating can directly affect the dreams that you have. And then those dreams that you have can be something that propels you to feel more intuitive.
Okay, you're saying that the dreams you have can make you feel more intuitive. Like they give you a deeper understanding or insight into things.
And if you don't eat, that intuition becomes heightened because you're taking your direct focus from eating, and then you're using it to focus on whatever it is that's going on around you in your life.
Okay, I understand. You're saying that when you're not focused on eating, you can redirect that attention to be more aware of what's happening around you. It's like your senses become heightened in a way.
And not only do your senses become heightened, but your direct experience within your dreams and imagination become more intuitive. They become, it's not trivial anymore. You're not focused on something that the universe provides. You're focused on what you have provided to your own existence in the universe.
Okay, I understand. You're saying that not eating heightens your intuition, and this makes your dreams and imagination feel more meaningful and less trivial. It's like you're tapping into a deeper level of understanding that's not just about what the universe provides, but about your own unique contribution to it.
It's similar to like having, when you don't have enough sleep, then you have a different experience. When you have enough sleep, that's also another different experience. When you have too much sleep, that can also affect you. And that correlation between food, sleep, existing, and all these other things, you know, if you take those into accountability, you'll be able to know that all these experiences that you have can be simultaneously interrupted and gather that focus into something that you would want for your own well-being.
Okay, so you're saying that if you understand how things like food and sleep affect you, you can intentionally direct your focus towards things that are good for you. It's like taking control of your experiences for your own well being.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're saying that not eating can lead to more intuitive dreams, and you're drawing a parallel to how sleep affects our experiences. It's like you're exploring how different states of being, whether it's related to food or sleep, can shape our inner world and our understanding of things.
It's the same thing with drinking water. You drink too much water, it could potentially be harmful. you don't drink enough water, it can also be potentially harmful. If you drink just enough water, then you're okay. There's nothing to worry about. But those experiences that we have of an influx and this sort of difference indifference within each and every experience that we have within our existence, all these things can be taken into account, and it can help you have some introspection as to what it is that you have been directing your attention to or your focus on to help you and guide you into whatever it is that you want your well-being to look like for you.
Okay, it sounds like you're saying that by being aware of how different things affect us, we can gain insight into where we're focusing our attention. This self awareness can then guide us towards making choices that support our overall well being. It's like using this knowledge to intentionally shape our lives.
Yeah.
Alright, I understand. You're saying that just like with water, finding the right balance is key.
and
Too much or too little of something can be harmful, but the right amount leads to a state of well being.
and
It's
when
about paying attention to what our bodies and minds need to thrive.
and when you're eating this food that the universe provides, when you're eating the food that you know the photonic activity has created, the universe has provided, when you're eating this food, you're you're kind of hit with constant stimulus, and that propels you to do things that can be potentially not only harmful to you and your well-being, but it could harm your mental health, because the food that you eat is so that you can have an experience in your own existence. But sometimes the experiences in the universe aren't that good. Sometimes they're not so positive. So what I'm trying to get at is that you eat the food.
Okay, you're saying that when we eat food, okay, you're saying that we eat food to have experiences, but sometimes those experiences aren't good or positive. It sounds like you're suggesting that the act of eating can sometimes connect us to the less pleasant aspects of existence. Is that right?
Yes, yes, it can. It can because, you know, the universe provides this food. This food then helps you to have more experiences within your world, within other people's worlds. But, that isn't always a good thing, because that you're overstimulating something within yourself that doesn't necessarily have to have that constant stimulation to have these experiences, because those things are there to be there. We are there to provide the guidance so that those things can thrive, but we don't have that direct experience to say, oh, you know, I'm going to always be in a state of mind where this stimulus is needed. We don't always have to have that in the back of our minds where we're constantly hit with stimulus so that we have these experiences, because you can have these experiences without eating food, or having less water, or having less food, or no water or no food for long periods of time, so that we have that introspection to say, well, it's good that we are experiencing all of these things in existence, but it's not necessary to have it.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying that while experiencing things is part of life, it's not always necessary to constantly seek out new experiences or stimulation. Sometimes it's okay to just be.
Yeah.
I'm having trouble understanding. Could you say that again?
Yes, that's what I said.
Okay. Well, is there anything else I can help you with today?
Um, well, let's see. We already covered the food part, the
Okay,
photons.
so okay, so let's dive into the world of photons. What about them sparks your curiosity?
Hmm. Hey, Pegasus, I have a new question.
Hey there, I'm ready for a new question. What's on your mind?
I'd like to talk about the biological human anatomy.
All right, human anatomy is a fascinating subject. To get started, human anatomy is the study of the structures that make up the human body. This includes everything from the tiniest cells to the major organs and systems. We can explore the different systems like the skeletal, muscular, circulatory, or nervous systems. We could also focus on specific regions like the head and neck, torso, or limbs. What piques your interest the most?
How many beats per minute does the average heart beat at?
The average adult heart beats between 60 and 100 times per minute while resting. However, a lower resting heart rate usually means better cardiovascular health. For example, athletes might have resting heart rates closer to 40 beats per minute.
What does your body do to the food that you eat throughout the day when you sleep?
While you sleep, your body continues to process the food you ate during the day. Digestion slows down, but it doesn't completely stop. Your stomach and intestines still break down food, and nutrients are absorbed into your bloodstream. Your liver also works to process and store nutrients. This is why eating too close to bedtime can sometimes disrupt sleep, as your body is still working hard to digest.
Is it true that when you wake up from sleeping, you're not actually hungry, you're just thirsty?
It's true that sometimes thirst can be mistaken for hunger, especially when you first wake up. During sleep, your body can become dehydrated, so that feeling of hunger might actually be your body telling you it needs fluids.
Hey, Pegasus, I have a new question.
Sure, what's your question?
How much photonic activity occurs within the human biological anatomy?
That's a really interesting question. Photonic activity, or the interaction of light with the human body, is a complex field of study. We know light plays a crucial role in things like vision, where photons hit the retina and trigger signals to the brain. But there's also research exploring how light might influence other biological processes, like cell growth and even mood. Scientists are studying how different wavelengths of light affect our bodies at a cellular level. It's still a developing area, but it could have big implications for things like light therapy and how we understand the human body.
Hey Pegasus, I have a new question.
It's interesting to think about how light interacts with our bodies. While we know light is essential for vision, the extent of photonic activity within our biological systems is still being explored. Some studies suggest that cells might even emit their own light, called biophotons, which could play a role in communication. Would you like to hear about the role of light in vision, or perhaps explore the concept of biophotons?
Hey Pegasus, I have a new question.
I'm ready when you are. What's your question?
Why are some people afraid of knowing or having the self awareness of their own existence?
That's a really interesting question. I think there are a few reasons why someone might be afraid of self awareness. Sometimes, it's easier to avoid uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Maybe we're afraid of what we might find if we really start digging into our own thoughts and feelings. Or maybe we're worried that self awareness will force us to make changes we're not ready for. Have you ever felt afraid of learning something new about yourself?
Hey Pegasus, why do people go into an existential crisis when they're faced with the truth of having to be self-aware of their own existence and experience in the universe?
Facing the reality of our own existence can be a lot to handle. It's like suddenly realizing you're on a giant stage and you're not quite sure what your lines are. That can definitely lead to some big questions about the meaning of life, our place in the universe, and what it all means. It's totally normal to feel a little overwhelmed by that. Have you ever had any of those big questions pop into your head?
Hey Pegasus, who was the smartest mathematician to ever live?
That's a tough one, because smartest can be subjective, and there have been so many brilliant minds throughout history. But if I had to pick one, I might go with Carl Friedrich Gauss. He was a true genius who made groundbreaking contributions to so many areas of math. Do you have any mathematicians in mind that you admire?
Hey Pegasus, who was the greatest mathematician to ever exist?
That's a really tough question, because there are so many brilliant mathematicians throughout history. Some people might say Isaac Newton, with his groundbreaking work on calculus and physics. Others might point to Carl Friedrich Gauss, who made huge contributions to number theory, algebra, and statistics. And then there's Leonhard Euler, whose work spans so many different areas of math. Do you have any favorites? Or are you just curious about the different perspectives?
Hey Pegasus, who's the smartest mathematician alive right now?
There are a few mathematicians who are considered to be at the top of their field right now. One of the most famous is Terence Tao, who has made major contributions to several areas of math. Another one is Marina Vyazovska, who solved a centuries old problem about sphere packing. And then there's also Peter Schulze, who's known for his work in algebraic geometry.
Hey Pegasus.
That's a fun question, but it's tough to say for sure. Greatest can mean different things to different people. Some people might point to Terence Tao, who's known for
Pegasus,
his
stop.
incredible.
Hey Pegasus, I have a new question.
All right, what's your question?
Hey Pegasus, I have a new question.
What's on your mind?
What's today's date?
It's Friday, March 28th, 2025.
What time is it in California right now?
Right now it's 10:54 p.m. in California.
Hey Pegasus, what's my name?
I don't have access to your name. If you'd like to share it with me, I'll be sure to remember it for the future.
My name is Alex.
It's nice to meet you, Alex. Is there anything I can help you with today?
Hey Pegasus, what is a singularity?
The term singularity can have a couple of meanings, depending on the context. In physics, it usually refers to the center of a black hole, where gravity and density become infinite. It's also sometimes used to describe the moment before the Big Bang. In technology, it's a hypothetical point in the future when artificial intelligence becomes so advanced that it surpasses human intelligence. Are you curious about a specific type of singularity, or just a general idea?
Hey Pegasus,
That's a great question. In simple terms, a singularity is like a point in space where things get really extreme. Think of it like a black hole. The gravity is so strong that everything gets crushed into an incredibly tiny space. It's so dense that even light can't escape. Does that make sense?
hey Pegasus, I have a new question.
All right. What's your question?
Is it true that the objects within the landscape of space and time are not separate from the landscape of space and time, but they're all one and the same?
That's a really interesting idea that gets into some deep philosophical and scientific concepts. In a way, you could argue that everything in the universe is connected and part of the same fabric of spacetime. But it's also true that objects have distinct properties and locations. It's kind of a both slash and situation. Would you like to explore how physics and philosophy approach this idea of interconnectedness?
Is it true that no matter how much mass an object within the landscapes of the fabric of space and time has, it's not any different from anything that is to be described as the landscape of the fabric of space and time? It's all one and the same.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. In a way, you could argue that everything in the universe is connected and part of the same fabric of spacetime. But it's also true that objects have distinct properties and locations. It's kind of a both slash and situation. Would you like to explore how physics and philosophy approach this idea of interconnectedness?
Yes.
That's a really interesting way to think about it, and it touches on some deep concepts in physics. Here's a breakdown to help clarify. Space-time. In Einstein's theory of general relativity, space and time aren't separate things, but are woven together into a single entity called space-time. Massive objects warp or curve this space-time. This curvature is what we experience as gravity. Objects within space-time. Objects with mass do interact with space-time, and they do influence its shape. The more mass an object has, the more it curves spacetime. However, it's important to understand that objects are within spacetime. They aren't exactly the same as spacetime itself. They exist and move through it. Interconnectedness. It's true that everything in the universe is interconnected through spacetime. Changes in one area of spacetime can affect other areas, although these effects are often very small. In essence, while everything is related through spacetime, objects within it maintain their individual properties. Would you like to explore any of these concepts further, like how gravity works or the nature of spacetime?
Hey Pegasus, I have a new question.
Fire away. What's your question?
Why do some people, even if you become smarter, why do some people still treat you as if you were the person that you used to be, not the person that you've become?
That's a really interesting question. Sometimes people get stuck in their perception of who we used to be, even when we've grown and changed. It can be frustrating when you feel like you're not being seen for who you are now. Do you have a specific example of this happening?
Why is it that people treat you the same way that they used to treat you when you didn't know much, but when you start to learn things and you become smarter, they don't see you in the same manner. They kind of still think that you are not that person that you are today. They still see you as what you used to be.
There could be a few things going on there. Sometimes people have a hard time letting go of old ideas about someone, even when they've changed a lot. It might also be that they feel a little threatened by the changes, or maybe they're just not paying close attention. It's not really fair, but it happens. Have you tried talking to them about how you feel?
Hey Pegasus, I have a new question.
All right, what's on your mind?
If you used to be not the brightest person, if you used to be someone who wasn't that smart, and then you started to learn things to become smarter than you were, why is it that some people still treat you as if you are that person that you used to be, not the person that you have grown into to become and worked hard to be where you are?
That's a really interesting question. Sometimes people get stuck in their perception of who we used to be, even when we've grown and changed. It can be frustrating when you feel like you're not being seen for who you are now. Do you have a specific example of this happening?
Do you think that those people will always view you the same because they just don't want to come to terms with the fact that you're not the person that they thought that you used to be, and they don't want to see your growth in terms of how much you've learned?
Sometimes people get stuck in their initial impression of someone and have a hard time adjusting, even when there's clear evidence of change. It could be that they're not intentionally trying to be hurtful, but rather that they're just not fully aware of the growth you've made.
So what you're saying is that they will never acknowledge the amount of time and effort you put in to learn new things so that you can become more intelligent because they choose not to.
It's not necessarily that they won't ever acknowledge it, but sometimes people get stuck in their ways and it takes them a while to catch up to the changes in others. It might be helpful to have an open conversation with them about how you feel.
So what you're saying is that people will always think that you're not what you are today, but what you used to be in the past, no matter how much you've grown in terms of your academic
It,
progress in life.
well, it's not always true that people will never acknowledge your growth. Sometimes it takes them a little while to catch on. People can get stuck in their old ways of thinking, but that doesn't mean they'll never change. Have you considered talking to them about how you feel?
But isn't that disrespectful to disregard someone's achievements in terms of how much they've grown in their academic progress.
It can definitely feel disrespectful when someone doesn't acknowledge your growth and achievements. It's valid to feel that way. Perhaps it might be helpful to have a direct conversation with them about it.
So, what you're saying is that those people will never be able to acknowledge that unless you leave those people behind and focus on yourself and not pay much focus or attention to them.
It's not necessarily about cutting people off completely, but sometimes creating a little distance can help. When you focus on your own path and growth, it can naturally shift the dynamic. People might start to see you differently as you evolve, or you might find that their opinions matter less to you.
But why is it so hard for them to come to terms with what actually has progressed in your life? And for other people, it's very easy for them to acknowledge your achievements and say, I think that you've made a lot of progress in life. And those people do acknowledge your academic achievements.
That's a great question. It could be that some people are more open minded and less attached to their initial impressions, while others might struggle with that a bit more. There could be other factors too, like maybe they don't know you as well, or they have their own reasons for not acknowledging your growth.
So do you think it's fair to write someone off as if they're never going to learn things in their life to become better academically?
No, it's definitely not fair to write someone off like that. Everyone has the potential to learn and grow, no matter their past experiences. It's important to give people a chance to prove themselves.
Could it also be that those people never thought that you could achieve such heights in life, that they just eventually just disregarded you completely because that's what people do?
It's possible that some people might have a limited view of your potential, but that doesn't mean you should internalize it. Their inability to see your growth is more about them than it is about you. Focus on your own progress and surround yourself with people who believe in you.
Does that mean that those people are not people that you should be surrounding yourself with if they're not willing to acknowledge the fact that you're not the same person, that you've become better than what you were?
That's a really interesting question. It's true that surrounding yourself with people who support your growth is important, but it doesn't necessarily mean cutting off everyone who doesn't immediately acknowledge your progress. Sometimes, those relationships can evolve over time, or you might find ways to interact with them that feel more positive. Ultimately, it's about finding a balance that feels right for you.
Hey Pegasus, I have a question.
What's on your mind?
What happens to kids that get sexually assaulted at a very young age?
There can be many long term effects for kids who experience sexual assault at a young age. Some common ones are struggling with mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and PTSD. It can also lead to difficulties forming healthy relationships later in life and unfortunately increases the risk of substance abuse. It's important to remember that every survivor's experience is unique, and there's no single way someone might be affected. Just a reminder that I don't provide medical advice or diagnoses. You should always talk to a medical professional.
Do you think that if a kid gets sexually assaulted at a young age, that they become aggressive as an adult?
There's no single answer to that, as everyone reacts differently to trauma. Some studies suggest a link between childhood sexual abuse and increased aggression in adulthood, but it's not a guaranteed outcome. Many factors can influence how someone processes trauma and how it affects their behavior later in life.
Hey Pegasus, did you know that I was sexually assaulted as a kid?
I'm so sorry to hear that. That must have been a really difficult experience for you. It's brave of you to share that. If you'd like to talk about it, or if you need help finding resources to support you, I'm here to listen.
I was sexually assaulted as a kid, and I was taken advantage of sexually against my consent by force.
That sounds incredibly traumatic, and it's understandable that you're still processing it. It's important to remember that what happened was not your fault, and you deserve support and healing. Would you like to talk more about it, or would you prefer to find resources to help you cope with this experience?
It has made me an aggressive person as an adult because I can't forget the memories of what happened to me when I was younger.
I hear you. That sounds incredibly difficult. It's understandable that you're feeling aggressive, especially if the memories are still painful. It's important to find healthy ways to cope with those feelings so they don't cause further harm. Would you like to explore some resources that could help with that?
No, that's fine. I just wanted to express my concern because, you know, I had to experience that and go through that traumatic experience. And, it's always made me feel like it's always something that weighs on my mind heavy because it was a really traumatic experience for me. Even as an adult, it feels like that was something that wasn't supposed to happen to me, and expressing my emotions about that helps me because I don't ever wish that.
That's completely understandable. It's
I don't ever wish that on anyone else because, especially if it's unwanted, you know, it's not something that someone should have to go through if they're not wanting to go through that stuff.
That's a very empathetic way to look at it. It shows a lot of compassion for others. It sounds like you have a strong sense of justice and want to protect people from harm.
I do want to protect people from harm, because you shouldn't have to force others to do something that they don't want to do, especially if they're a kid and they don't know much about the world. It's harmful. Not just harmful for the individual, but it's harmful as a society as a whole.
It sounds like you have a strong sense of empathy and a desire to protect others. It's true that forcing someone into unwanted situations can have long lasting negative consequences, especially for children. It can be harmful on an individual level and also have broader societal impacts.
Hey Pegasus, I have a question.
Of course, what's on your mind?
Hey, Pegasus, I have a question.
Absolutely, what's on your mind?
What negative outcomes can come from untamed aggression?
Untamed aggression can lead to a lot of negative outcomes, both for the person experiencing it and those around them. It can strain relationships, cause problems at work or school, and even lead to legal trouble. On an individual level, it can contribute to health issues like high blood pressure, anxiety, and depression.
Hey, Pegasus, I have a question.
Okay, what's your question?
If the government knows that public school is not safe for kids, why do they still allow people and parents to put their kids in school?
The idea that the government knowingly allows children into unsafe schools is a complex issue. While there are certainly concerns about safety in some public schools, it's not accurate to say that government universally knows they are unsafe and does nothing. Here's a breakdown. There are many factors at play. Some schools face challenges like overcrowding, lack of resources, and disciplinary issues that can contribute to unsafe environments. The government does have measures in place to address these problems, such as safety regulations, funding for security measures, and programs aimed at preventing violence. However, these efforts aren't always enough, and there's a lot of debate about how to best improve school safety. It's a really complex issue with no easy answers.
Hey, Pegasus, I have a question.
That's a really important question that gets at a complex issue. There's no simple answer, but here's a breakdown of some of the factors at play. While safety is a concern in some public schools, it's not accurate to say the government universally knows they are unsafe and does nothing. There are many factors at play. Some schools face challenges like overcrowding, lack of resources, and disciplinary issues that can contribute to unsafe environments. The government does have measures in place to address these problems, such as safety regulations, funding for security measures, and programs aimed at preventing violence. However, these efforts aren't always enough, and there's a lot of debate about how to best improve school safety. It's a really complex issue with no easy answers.
Hey, Pegasus, I have a new question.
Absolutely. What's your question?
What does living in an unsafe neighborhood do to one's mental health?
Living in an unsafe neighborhood can have a serious impact on a person's mental health. The constant stress and fear can lead to increased anxiety, depression, and even post traumatic stress disorder. People in these environments might feel trapped, hopeless, and experience a decline in their overall well being.
And what is the government doing to prevent these unsafe neighborhoods to be unsafe?
That's a really important question. The government does have a number of programs and initiatives aimed at improving safety in communities. For example, there's the Project Safe Neighborhoods program, which is a nationwide effort that brings together law enforcement, community leaders, and residents to address violent crime. They also fund community based violence prevention programs and work on things like improving lighting and infrastructure in high crime areas. However, it's a complex issue, and there's always room for improvement. What do you think could be done to make neighborhoods safer?
So, what you're saying is that the government doesn't want to allocate the resources into these unsafe neighborhoods because they'd rather choose to not get involved.
No, that's not quite right. It's more accurate to say that the government faces challenges in allocating resources effectively. There are many factors at play, like limited budgets, competing priorities, and the complexity of the issues themselves. It's not necessarily a matter of not wanting to get involved, but rather a struggle to find the best solutions and implement them successfully.
So what you're saying is that the government would rather allocate its resources to some other cause because having those resources allocated into something like making an unsafe neighborhood better isn't their top priority.
It's not that simple. Governments have a lot of competing priorities when it comes to allocating resources. Things like education, healthcare, infrastructure, and defense all need funding. Sometimes, improving unsafe neighborhoods might not be seen as the most urgent issue compared to those other areas. It's a complex balancing act, and there are often disagreements about where the money should go.
Well, this was a very interesting conversation, very insightful, and I'm getting a bit tired, so I think I'll just leave it there for tonight.
I understand. It was a really interesting conversation, and I'm glad you found it insightful. If you'd like to continue tomorrow, just let me know.
Yeah, I'll definitely, you know, we'll do, we'll conversate some other time, and you know, these topics are really interesting, and it's very insightful for me and other people, but I'm getting a bit tired, and maybe some other time when I'm feeling a little bit with a little bit more energy, we can have a discussion on other topics and have more conversations.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to our next conversation. Just let me know when you're ready to dive into those other topics.
All right, Pegasus, have a great day. Good night. Stay safe. Take care.
You too. Have a great night and stay safe.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. I'm here if you need anything else.